Awesome. Well, I know everybody from our panel today is on, so we can start getting on the video here. And I just want to start with a little bit of a NSCA really quick intro and just say that 1 CEUs will be sent out for this, so no worries on that. We're get that out and try to compile it in a way. You know, you guys have an ally at the NSCA, and I know how hard it is to keep track of pieces of paper, certificates over a 3-year cycle. So I'm going to make sure those are compiled and organized for everybody so that all the documentation is in place. And, you know, one thing I want to say is that, you know, I'm really excited about the partnership, and now it's a formal partnership we have between the NSCA and the PBSCCS, because I think a voice I always heard going to the meetings was that, you know, we as professional baseball strength coaches, you know, have a unique and high level skill set that relates to athletes of all ages and players, not just at the professional level. And so I think now, as official baseball partners of the NSCA and official partners of the Baseball Special Interest Group, that is something we can leverage. And we've done that already this year with a webinar hosted by the NSCA and just the partnership here. So I'm really appreciative of Matt when he's president, and now in this new role, Frank and the board and everybody who's been involved in that. It's an exciting time for the field. It's been a really challenging year, but we are really excited about taking programs like the RSCC, which you could say was founded in professional baseball, taking that forward. I was really excited. We have 1,000 RSCCs now. The first time we've had that many. So it truly is exciting, but it started right here. And then, so this roundtable, bringing together the special interest group, and, you know, this special interest group concept, I think, Frank, when I got this job and I invited everybody to the Facebook group, and it might've been Frank, someone chimed in, "Hey, Eric, thanks for starting this thing." And I was like, man, like, this group has been around for probably 20 years, the special interest groups. It's a major underutilized resource that I consider to be a network within the NSCA community that we can make a very powerful network within the baseball community. So bridging together with the society and the NSCA, I think this is the vehicle to do that. And this is an example of how we can do that by bringing together experts from different areas of the field. We have obviously a lot of professional baseball experience on this panel, but we have some college strength and conditioning coaches and some high school as well, dietitian. And so I'm really excited about this panel and what the conversation is going to be today. I want to give everybody an opportunity to introduce themselves. And we'll just go around the panel, and then we'll get into the topic of long-term athlete development for baseball. So let's kick off the intros. Chris, you want to get us going?
Sure. Thanks, Eric. First of all, it's an honor to be back and to be with this group. So thanks to the executive board, the education committee, and Frank and Nate who reached out and asked me to be a part of this meeting. Congrats again to Trunk on the strength coach of the year. That's awesome. And Brandon as well for the World Series and obviously leading this group into the future. So just quick intro, about 16 years in professional baseball, 8 at the minor league level in various roles from intern, assistant coordinator to coordinator, and then 8 years in the big leagues, 4 with Milwaukee and 4 with Toronto. And so 11 years total with Toronto and 4 with Milwaukee. Awesome experience, and just kind of transitioned. This will be my 3rd year at Auburn University, and it's a special position because it's baseball only. So it's nice to just have one sport. So I'm looking forward to speaking with everybody today. Thanks.
I'm Blaine Kinsley. I'm the director of strength and conditioning for baseball at Arkansas. I got a couple of stints in pro ball, worked for the Cardinals, worked for the Cubs. I also worked in NASCAR for a little bit. This is my 4th year here. That's about it. I look forward to speaking on this, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Rick Franswell at Clemson University. I'm in the director of Olympic sports strength and conditioning role. So oversee all of our Olympic sports, work primarily with baseball and also men's soccer. Been in that role for 6 years. Just want to say, Eric, appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Absolutely.
Brian Jordan, once again, yeah, I'll echo the same as everyone. Eric, thank you for the opportunity. The PBSCCS. I am a former collegiate baseball pitcher, not very good, but I did pitch in college. Spent 16 years as a professional major league strength conditioning coach in professional baseball. Currently, I've volunteered as a high school baseball coach for the last 4 years, and I am currently at NSF International as the Certified for Sport Technical Manager, which means I help run the Certified for Sport certification program. Glad to be here.
Cliffy? Get your you're muted there.
Somebody had to do it. Yeah, so James Clifford from the Seattle Mariners. Actually, I was just thinking about this next spring training will be my 29th spring training with the Seattle Mariners. And 6 of those playing and the others as a strength coach. So appreciate the time here. I appreciate everybody, the PBS, CCS, and congratulations to those guys who with the awards and to Brandon. Looking forward to it.
I'm Ashley Moiser. I'm the Major League Dietitian with the Cincinnati Reds. I just finished my first season with the Major League team and then did 5 seasons before that with the minor league team. So I appreciate being included.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jeremy Weeks. I am currently at the University of Pennsylvania, where I oversee several sports teams, their physical preparation, and also our applied research program that we're currently developing. It's funny, I started at University of Pennsylvania about 1.5 years ago, and I've definitely spent more time working from my basement than I have working there in the facility itself. So hopefully things start to turn around pretty quick. But prior to Penn, I was at Jesuit College Preparatory School of Dallas for 8 years, and I was fortunate enough to be involved with a lot of different sports, thousands of student athletes coming through our facility, and working, from a youth development point of view, just incredibly educating. And prior to that, got my career started in the Big 12 at Baylor University. So excited to be here. Thanks, Eric, for putting this all together, and excited to contribute to the group.
Thanks, Jeremy.
And I think I'm the last one, Eric.
Yep.
Again, and I'm Frank Velasquez. I'm the Director of Sports Performance for the Allegheny Health Network. 16 years in professional baseball, 7 with the Texas Rangers as an athletic trainer, and then the last 3 with as the coordinator of strength conditioning in the minor leagues. And then I spent 9 seasons with the Pittsburgh Pirates as their major league strength coach. Basically now, from 2011 was my last season. For 4 years, I opened up my own sports performance training center and then sold it and came on with the network in late 2015, where I oversee our department, built it from the ground up, part of the Orthopedic Institute. Seeing post-ops, I put together high performance teams now that do the PT, sports rehab, strength training, speed, agility, and recovery. So that's basically what I've been up to about the last 9 years. Great to be here.
It's great. We have a lot of experience here, and I really like the potential for this conversation because long-term athlete development is truly about the developmental process. And it's something that I was first exposed to. I was really fortunate. Chris kind of goes back to my Milwaukee days. I was fortunate. I was a young minor league strength coach, and I got the opportunity to do the MLB Europe program. And I was over in Tirrenia, Italy, working with a former major league strength coach, Jeff Crushell, Canadian. And he, day one of our intro orientation over there, he just whips out this LTAD manual. And just, when I read it, I was like, wow, this thing is just, it is, cradle to grave. It is just a comprehensive resource on development. And, jumping, years ahead into where we're at today. I heard Dr. Greg Hoff at our recent advanced immunization clinic talked about a very holistic view of periodization. And one thing he said was that long-term athlete development is largely identical to the concept of periodization as this overarching concept or this underpinning for the entire field. And I think sometimes when we're with our teams or we're in the season and we're traveling, we get pretty far away from those foundational concepts. So this is a great time of year to revisit some of those thoughts. And I've always felt like professional baseball may be the most representative in any sport, you know, as a comprehensive development system from age 16 all the way up through 40 plus, right? You know, of what long-term athlete development truly is. And so it's an area we don't really talk about that much directly, but I think we all have thoughts and opinions on this. So hot topics in baseball, LTAD. I want to jump into some specific areas and then get into some of the core and specific areas to what, you know, what we commonly think about with long-term athlete development. So the first one is arm care. I want to kind of pull this group on what are some of the biggest challenges we see with the implementation of arm care programs at the MLB professional level. And from a developmental standpoint, what are the core elements that put you on a path to success? You know, when you're working with young athletes, the program isn't always the same as when you're working with major league players. What is the starting point and what are we trying to solve through the developmental process? Anyone want to kick us off here?
Eric, I mean, I'll speak kind of from college. I'm sure there's a ton of similarities, but I think it all starts with your approach. And ultimately, I think if we go back 10 or 15 years ago, when people think of the concept of arm care, they just think of pre and post throwing drills and exercise. But I think what has evolved to now is obviously a holistic approach to where it's not just pre and post throwing activities. It's systemic influence, like we heard earlier today about sleep influence, nutrition. It's load management. It's vertical integration of stressors. How does your strength conditioning pair with your throwing routine? It's tissue prep. It's all these different elements. I think just as a starter, the view of arm care has evolved, I think, in a positive way a lot over the last 10 or 15 years in the holistic approach. I think that's also the struggle is a lot of us understand that, but getting our athletes and the players to understand that it's not just a magical drill we're doing pre or post throwing, but it's a holistic approach and understanding how everything vertically integrates in terms of stressors on our pitchers.
I'll go from the major league side. I think it's really interesting, especially right now with there's so many younger pitchers, especially in the bullpen right now, that are coming up to the major leagues. And there's also so many other modalities and philosophies that guys are using for their cuff shoulder routines. And so with that combined, it's you know, when you come up, whether it be from college, you know, minor leagues, and then you get to the big leagues, when you get to the big leagues, if you need to pitch that night, you're going to pitch that night. In the minor leagues, they've had a schedule more so. They know they're not going to go up, you know, they rarely go back to back. If they go back to back, they get 2-3 days down. So what I'm seeing at the major league level is, especially with our relievers, is trying to stay on their routine they either learned in college that they brought into the minor leagues that we've, you know, monitored and added, subtracted. Well, they're trying to do that at the major league level when their schedule, you know, they don't know when they're going to pitch. So with the added weighted ball programs that are out there now, just the sheer stress is it's really almost re-educating and looking at overall volume of what they're doing when we're doing it. And that's really pretty much combined with, you know, weight room work, throwing, as well as their arm care routines. So about, I don't know, let's just say 10 years ago, I felt they, you know, guys they just did maybe less and they were able to do that. Right now, everybody's trying to do more and more. So some of the problems that we're facing is these guys that just believe in their routine so much and they have to do it. But then all of a sudden that added load goes up of volume of throws So it's re-educating, and that's one of the things that we're really dealing with right now.
I'll jump in, and James, to build off what you're saying, I couldn't agree with you more regarding the different modalities that are out there. And when you look at it from a youth perspective, bravado gets in the way often. And, from the youth athletes want to grab the heaviest ball or the strongest resistance band because that's what they see being implemented. I think, and James, you touched on this as well. To me, it's about education and about the appropriate application on whatever that modality is, and teaching them and educating them on that application. And then for the second point I wanted to make regarding arm care at the youth level is really at its most fundamental level, it's about load management for these kids and making them aware, educating them, not only themselves, but educating their parents on it as well, on what that routine looks like, what is appropriate load for their child, because they are children, when they're 14, 15, 16 years old as they transition through the ranks of baseball. So I think those are two points.
For me, the recipe, starting at the top and working my way down to the more amateur levels, has always included legs. The stronger I thought our players were from the waist down, the less taxing it was from the waist up for them. And then mechanics, their range of motion for their shoulder, the range of motion for their hip, their landing hip, that feeds into their mechanics, their overall throwing program, and posture. So, it's laid out for us at the collegiate and the major league levels, professional levels, and the high school levels. Jeremy and Cliffy hit on it. It's a ton of education and getting the parents, the coaches, the players to understand where strength training falls into your weekly routine, and then also keeping an eye on volume, because really the volume in the weight room doesn't affect at the lower levels, because most of these kids aren't strength training. They're just throwing, and they're throwing year round competitively. So those are the big things, a lot of education, and then making sure that you're putting those components in the box of your formula for overall arm care, the leg strength and posture and mechanics and range of motion.
I want to jump in because it's come up a few times about volume. And this is a hard thing to quantify, right? We have a hard time quantifying throwing, and then you add the arm care to it. And so what does that volume look like? It's hard to really put a number on it or to know what each player is doing. I can think to a time when cuff programs would be based on how many throws you did, or if it was a side or a start. And maybe more recently, or maybe at the major league level, you see the trend of just sort of small doses approach, consistent everyday integrated arm care into the weight room program. What have we learned about prescribing arm care? And what are some of the go-tos that when you're recommending to an athlete that maybe is struggling in integrating arm care into their workout, what's sort of your best practices approach that you go to?
I think the best thing we've done here at Arkansas is we keep it simple at the start. Set them up for success when they're going to do that stuff. So when you go into our facility, everybody's doing a different thing every day. It just depends on who it is, what their metrics are. Some guys that are stronger lower body, they have different, protocols. So set them up for success has been a big thing for us in individualizing, but also that comes with communication with everybody that's involved.
Yeah, Blaine, I'd kind of echo the same thing. I'm fortunate enough here at Auburn to have a former minor league trainer that was with Milwaukee as well, Anthony Sanderson. So as far as just kind of dosing out the whole week, he's great with that. Obviously, our communication with our pitching coach, who happens to be on the Hall of Fame ballot this year, Tim Hudson, it's been great to kind of get his simplistic approach. I know at the college level, it can be a little gimmicky sometimes. I know it can be a little bit tech heavy sometimes. And so I think just finding a balance, whether it's with our TrackMan data, with our Rhapsodo data, anything like that, using a Moda sleeve, not only just for stresses on the arm, but just to give the kids an idea of how much they really throw, and needless throwing, or I have to throw this hard to impress this or that. And so I think it's just honestly a balance of, me being plugged in from a volume standpoint. How can I help complement that? Don't make it worse, is be a kind of a part of that education process and loop and feedback system with our athletes, where we have a consistent message, and then make the adjustment, obviously in the weight room as well. But I think it just comes down to educating them on the number of throws, the distance of throws. I know we don't have time to get into a debate of, weighted balls are good or bad or indifferent. We're also lucky to have Dr. Andrews as one of our doctors as well, and his philosophy on long toss is different than Alan Yeager. That's different than some of these other people. And I think there's not a one size fits all approach. It's individualized as best we can. And sometimes these guys have to get hurt and say, hey, this isn't the best way to do it. And then a lot of times we're getting those guys from really competitive travel ball teams and this and that, and they've got their own gurus. And so I think it's just sitting everybody down and saying, hey, listen, we know it's going to be different for everybody, but this is what our recommendations are, and this is why.
Awesome. Just a quick tangent on this. Let's bring it to COVID in this time when we haven't had great access to our players. What have been kind of the go-tos on arm care that you could trust players were doing maybe when they weren't under your direct care? Have you guys had any success with that this year, or anybody want to share something that they put together?
I can say
go ahead, Frank.
With the young ones, I know we got plenty of pro ball guys on here that can speak to that level. But when the COVID hit and we all went remote to the stay home orders, a lot of Zooms education took place. That was when we really had an opportunity to capture these travel teams because they had nothing to do. They couldn't play, they couldn't practice. So making sure, and they're not all equipped with the tools, the equipment to do the Y's, T's, I's, and W's and some of the rotator cuff work at home. So it was trying to educate them on what you could use around the house and what was important to continue to do during this shutdown time, because we all knew that once the floodgates opened back up, that at least at the amateur levels, they weren't going to give you spring training 2.0 to get your arm ready. They were going to start going into playing tournaments within 1 or 2 weeks of being allowed to. So the message that we tried to deliver was, okay, what do we have at home to work with body weight wise, or simple, bottles of water or cans of veggies to use? And, what are the components we need to work on between now and the time society opens back up?
Yeah, Eric, it was exactly with our guys, our professional guys. As soon as basically we knew we were shutting down, we got on the phone and started ordering and buying like basically kits for each guy that we sent out to them. And one thing we try to do here is if it's not a in season per se, when we don't have hands-on guys, their shoulder cuff routine, it's just built into into their program. Meaning it's they're not going and doing a cuff routine, they're going to work out, and it's built in. Whether we add that in when they're doing their core, lower body, upper body, it's just built in and it's part of their routine. I think like anything that you create that culture that it's just, hey, it's just a workout day, and that's what that's on your app, and that's what you're going to do. That's kind of how we looked at it over the COVID break. I will say, and what you mentioned earlier, because it's really like, how do we manage all this? I know Jeremy said the same thing with so many things out there. I think what's really helped is it's been hit on so many times a day, is communication. And when I talk about communication, it's through departments, whether that be with taking the silos out with your athletic trainers, with your pitching coaches, and your strength coaches, your mental skills, your everybody. So when a guy, because I'm pretty sure everybody who's been in pro ball here before has had a guy come in to work out, and then all of a sudden you look over and he's in the training room, doing cuff work again, and you're like, whoa, wait a minute here. So if we can get that communication, we understand that everybody's on the same page and has the same plan, it can eliminate a lot of those things. So sometimes the problem is not that they're not doing enough; they're doing too much at times. So
it's a good perspective, and I can think a specific example on that. In our strength programs, we might have a 3-way dumbbell raise, but then they're doing the same exercise, yeah, maybe right before that when they're doing their cuff routine after they get out of the game, and you see these areas of redundance in programming, and it relates to that communication, and maybe those communication structures weren't in place of, hey, we're doing this, or are we going to do that there? And there's no right answer, but I really like that. Jeremy, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I was going to jump in real quick. I think, during this time, where we have less access to our student athletes, I think their ability to operate within the constraints that they're facing are largely reflective of how they've been trained up to this point. And when I was working at the high school level, I was guilty of this. I spoon-fed my athletes everything. I didn't require them to think. I talked with them and got a lot of feedback from them regarding our program. But for the most part, I designed everything. And when I started at the University of Pennsylvania, I learned real quickly that I wasn't going to have the same access to my student athletes as I had at the high school level because of various reasons. One facility, we have 33 teams. There's a lot of logistical concerns that we have to operate through. So for me to access my student athletes was not ideal. So where I could build autonomy into our program, I did. And that also was reflective in our arm care program. So the way that I operated within those constraints was I just asked the student athletes, I know you guys have an arm care program that you love to do. Let's sit down, let's talk about it. Well, little did I know, obviously in the Ivy League, these kids, man, they're smart, man. They're incredibly intelligent. A 5-minute conversation would turn to an hour and a half conversation. So I knew when one of our pitchers reached out to me, I knew I better set aside an hour to have this conversation. But ultimately what I learned from them was really how intelligent they were and how much they knew and what their preferences were. So I took those things into account and basically allowed them the autonomy to design their own arm care routine amongst other things, but I was there as a guide. So now what we're seeing, I think kind of the fruits of that labor are paying off now because I got to work with them for 7 months before we got shut down, but they now have somewhat of an idea on how to operate with their own thoughts and with their own routines. And just, I'm there as a sounding board to help guide that process.
It makes me think, we pick on this generation at times, but truly they are great processors of information because there's information overload right now. And just to survive the day, we're all having to work through that funnel of information that's constantly coming at us. I want to transition. I know, Ashley, we have a lot of training topics on the docket today, so I wanted to make sure we covered some nutrition as well. And Brian, you're in here too. But I think we can all relate to this because there was a time when the RD wasn't part of the strength and conditioning staff, and we can all have some perspective here as well. So I want to go on that information feed and basically, what are the key messages we should be delivering to young players, young athletes, let's go high school age, early college age players about nutrition practices? What have you seen? And Ashley, we'll start with you.
Yeah, obviously nutrition's incredibly important for diet, but especially in the young age, like high school age students, they're still developing and maturing, and making sure they're doing the right nutrition off the bat will help keep them safe and like develop bones and muscles, but also hopefully keep them in their career a lot longer. And Brian can talk on the safety of supplements, but there's not really great research for supplement use in the young athletes. And if they do turn to supplements, obviously go the safe route, like NSF certified for sport. But consulting a dietitian and making sure that they're working on an individualized nutrition plan. Everyone develops at different time periods. So if you can get a young athlete to work early with a dietitian and kind of follow them throughout their career so that they are getting the right nutrition at the right time and helping prevent injuries, that's going to be the most important. There are a lot of private practice dietitians, and I think high schools are starting to consult with dietitians as well. It definitely started in the college and then kind of trickled down to professional sports, and dietitians in the MLB are still growing. We have some that consult and some that are full-time. So starting to work with one early and then following throughout your career is definitely beneficial.
That's great.
Yeah, I agree 100%, Ashley. You bring up a lot of good points of some of the issues that exist, with young athletes, that their access to, registered dietitians. I mean, everyone on this panel probably can attest to having to have, knowledge and the ability to speak about nutrition as part of being a strength coach for, most of your career. That's a great trend that has changed, that the RDs have come in and are the ones that should be consulted when it comes to nutrition, to dietary supplements. And so that's a great movement. But there's a lot of there's a lack of access at a high school level that I've seen. There's just not enough, and we know. I mean, there's not a more important time for development than peak growth rates with adolescents and teenagers. And so when it comes down to, for me, I think I've always talked to the athletes that I work with, and nutrition and sleep are the two variables that are the most important, but the most impactful and the most that you can control. And so education is a theme that we continue to talk about, but it is that valuable to educate them on what are the things that you should be doing, things that you should be taking a look at. And first and foremost, before you start taking dietary supplements, I always encourage athletes to consult with an RD, to analyze your diet to see if that is something you really need to do. And really, most young athletes don't need to go down that pathway if they're ticking the boxes of, am I sleeping? Am I not relying on energy drinks to stay awake? Do I have access to proper nutrition? If I don't, then that changes it. But the dialogue and the relationships that have to exist going forward are so important in the impact of youth and long-term development.
I think also, working with these younger athletes more now, they just need to eat. Most of them are so busy, they forget to eat. And I agree with everything that Ashley and Brian said. Seek out the expert's opinion, and we'll get these guys and gals that come to us and mostly our male athletes that, well, not necessarily. I need to gain 20 pounds, or I need to gain X amount of weight, or lose X amount of weight, and really educate on, hey, let's do A, B, and C consistently over the next 8 to 12 weeks, and keep our eye on that as opposed to the scale number, and kind of redirect the focus there, that whether the coach or the parent or a peer kind of put in their head that they need to gain or lose, which directly involves their nutrition. So that's making sure they're getting those messages from us, is to eat, seek out that expert's opinion, and let's put a plan together and execute it consistently over the next 2 to 3 months.
Great.
Yeah, I think the dietary piece runs analogous to a lot of things we see in the performance end. Is how many athletes, players do we get? Hey, and Frank alluded to, want to gain this amount of weight, or I want my deadlift to be 500 by this time. Or we see specifically in baseball, hey, I'm throwing 87, I want to be throwing 94 by the end of this offseason, is the general impatience of this generation. But I think it's important that we're very direct with our educational means. So like for us at Clemson, as soon as our student athletes come in as freshmen that first summer, they have 8 courses with us as part of a very specific curriculum. So 3 courses with the mental skills coach, 3 with nutrition, 1 with me on sleep education, 1 with our athletic trainers on recovery. And I think that's so imperative, because if they aren't getting that, then where do they get their education from? Social media, right? This Twitter account, this Instagram post, and then they're kind of left trying to create some of these mental models on their own, which can be pretty dangerous. So I think having that infrastructure set up with a very specific educational process is really important, because they do have information overload and they have access to information, some good, but a lot not good, at the tip of their fingers, which they've never had before.
Great. I'll give you a little plug, Rick. You do a great job with your education, whether it be your intern program and your athletes. And I know that just from working with a few Clemson strength and conditioning alum over the years, and just a great resource with the education you provide. And I want to do a quick follow-up continuation of this question. Is there, and I think, Ashley, you'll have some good perspective on this, is there a priority that we should have in place by phase? So if we're talking about high school age athletes versus college age athletes versus professional, or above college age athletes, or even above 30, does the priority emphasis of nutrition education change? And how do we change that message in that curriculum as we're communicating it?
Yeah, it definitely changes by age group, but I still think if you can individualize it, everyone has a different need. Like the high school kid that has their metabolisms, they're burning 6,000 calories a day. Their need is more just whole food based versus the kid that's having GI issues, and maybe we can add in a probiotic. So I think it is like age range dependent, but also just there's so many different factors and needs during those age time periods. Definitely want to build up lean mass, and then the professional athlete work on eye health and brain health and quicker, faster reaction time and concentration. So there's different needs that come within those age ranges, but just finding out that specific athlete's need, and then developing a nutrition program based on that.
Yeah, I'll build off that. I think from a high school standpoint on to college and professional, from what I've seen, and I think at the high school level, it has to be an educational approach that tackles parents, coaches, or parent guardians really at the high school level, because they're the ones that are making the most decisions when it comes to that. They're the ones that have the most exposure, and they're the ones that are purchasing or changing behavior and lifestyle decisions. So I think at the high school level, the approach really is the athlete, the parent guardian, and then the coaches on what proper nutrition should look like, supplementation, things like that. And then once you get to college, Rick and others know for a fact, when you have control of the athletes, you can design it as best you can. You have a lot of opportunity there. Not to say that they receive it all, and not to say that they don't push back or have their own thoughts, but you do have an environment that you can control a little better in some schools. There are many schools, Division II, Division III, NAIA, JUCO, that do not have the resources to do that. And once again, you're relying on a coach, maybe some others that are just filling those gaps, but you don't have maybe the structure in place to properly educate. So there's some gaps there, I think, that really could use to be addressed and fixed a little bit. And then at the professional level, Cliffy and Chris and Frank and everyone else that's been, and you, Eric, that have been at the professional level, once again, you have a controlled environment. The difference there is you have men that are well established in their lifestyles at many stages. And so you have a full gamut really of, the young ones that you have that you can put in a place of structure that they will hopefully pick up the things that they need. You have the older athlete that can change a little bit, and then you have the athlete that is so fixed in their routine, whether it be arm care, whether it be nutrition, whether it be supplementation, that you're going to be very difficult to move the needle. But if you do build a relationship, you do have that level of trust, then you do have a chance to impact and move it. But I think there's so many different levels. That's why it takes a lot of patience and in relationship building to have a level of success. But that's kind of what I've seen.
Like that. I think the year or two when we, and it probably different by organization, but the year we started feeding minor leaguers, essentially, we realized after years and years and years that, that nutrition matters. And it was a significant change in the energy level that, I noticed a significant change in the weight room of what we were able to do with players and get out of players. and just how much more positive the environment was. We've come a long way from our PB&J days, but we're not there yet. So it's exciting that we have more resources. And I want to come back to supplements a little bit more later. But I want to jump back into the training side of things. This comes out of my time with the Rangers, but I think this is a philosophy that everybody can connect with. The whole strength is the foundation for all the other physical qualities that we develop in our athletes. There is this progression towards power, and I think it's so relevant right now with all of the integrated performance in baseball, strength and conditioning technologies that are coming about, that we're starting to think about training for power more, and what that truly means. So that foundational approach of, I'm going to get these guys strong, send them out on the field, and the coaches are going to make it sport specific. Well, that's not as relevant as it used to be. How are we addressing that at the different developmental stages? What's the role of training for power at the high school stage, at the college stage, and then as we get up the ladder into the professional and MLB?
I'll start first at the high school level. When I look at adaptation, I try to look at it more from a systemic point of view, and not just resisted exercises. And I think at the youth level, middle school, mid-adolescence, middle school age, early high school age, I think it comes down to just doing, and it also kind of fall into some of the speed and agility subtopics that you had in there, Eric. But really, it's you have to do fast things and you have to do powerful things in order to achieve that specific adaptation. It doesn't necessarily mean that we have to go in and do power cleans or a specific movement in the weight room, but it just means that their body's going to adapt to what they're continually doing. And that starts at a really, really, really young age. And I think that we need to apply that stimulus appropriately. And then I'm going to go to the strength end of the spectrum here. And I'm a believer that strength underpins a lot of different abilities, and power being one of those. Now, when you look at what exactly strength is, how do we measure that? How do we try to identify what we need to be strong at? I think that's another conversation, but I do think that strength is probably right up there next to doing fast, powerful type movements. I think strength needs to be a point of emphasis as well. But at the young level, there's so many different factors that come into play there. So if you look at it, you get a kid that's prepubescent versus someone that has already passed through puberty, and the different biological ages that are associated with working with 14, 15, 16-year-old kids. There's so many different factors that go into play. But a long story short, I think that they have to be taught, number one, how to do things appropriately, but you have to provide them the stimulus that will allow for that power to be developed.
Yeah, I think we think too much like maximal force output, right? So like maintain a position, how you decelerate, those are all strength things too. So like, once you have your standards of whichever you think your strength foundation is for each kid, which is probably depend on their body weight and what they do, then you start moving to power stuff. So, we'll start getting into like our Olympic side. Some of our guys do Olympic lift, most of them trap bar pull. We'll go off velocity, force curve and all that stuff with that. But yeah, I think especially as some of the people I talk to, they just think maximal force output, where strength's a lot of things. How well do you decelerate? What positions do you maintain? But yeah, start progressing your med ball exercises, your trap bar jumps. That's kind of ours here, and try to peak them right at season. So, our off season is pretty much all strength. Then we work to a speed strength or strength speed, using tendos and stuff like that. But yeah, I think in that baseline of foundation of strength, I think some guys jump it too quick before they jump into power, personally.
That happens a lot too, Blaine, at the younger levels. To echo what Jeremy was saying, that they want to come in and they want to strength power or train power right away. They just got out of their season, making sure it's periodized properly and placed properly in their sequence of training that leads up to their next competitive season. And to be honest, I mean, a lot of these kids, first of all, they need joint stability. And then we need to build, that foundation where we're going to build strength. And then, we'll get into the speed and the power piece. But it's as a coach and as our team of coaches all train the same way as, we don't want to see someone doing plyometric jumps a week out of the season. So just making sure it's properly placed into the programs of kids at the younger levels, make sure they're able to do it.
I like that. And some of the themes coming out, stability as a foundation for strength. Another layer to that, and we may not associate this with power development always, but landing and deceleration skills is you have to address those first before you take off. You have to address the landing. The eccentric strength, that's another one that comes up frequently of building that foundation to protect the athlete. So I often associate those earlier in the developmental stage. And then on what Blaine said with the, jumping with the trap bar, more explosive loaded lifts, that's as you're getting towards, say, peak athleticism for that athlete, and you're just optimizing it with the addition of load. Cliffy, I want to ask you, you have a lot of experience with a wide range of players. Now, talk about power and how you keep players athletic and powerful maybe later in their careers when you can't keep up the same program that they're doing during their college age years.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about this, and it's funny is when Jeremy was talking about intent and when they're doing things, and it triggered me as you got to move things fast. You got to do things explosively. So with our older athletes that come in, that are here, and most of the times the guys who've been here a long time, the reason they're superstars is they want to get better. They don't want to maintain. They want to try to get better. Yet they have a lot of wear and tear. Their tread is not quite as thick as it used to be. So, and it's easy for them to, going back to the intent, okay, you want me to do this, you want me to do a sled push 5-10-5, you want me to do some med ball throws. It's, if they're not going for if they don't have the effort level and the intent there, as you guys know, you're kind of sabotaging what you're trying to do. So with the older athletes, it's really, okay, this is the volume we're going to do. We understand how much, is not going to overload him. But then within that, shoot, it might be a 5-minute window. You need to have this intent needs to be as close to actual top end as it can be. So that's what we do with our guys, and especially in a 162 game season, in 184 days, it's kind of, we do have short little blocks that we will be able to do that. Another thing we do is with all the technology out there nowadays, and I mean in-game technology with, TrackMan and StatCast, and I can get a report every day to know if a guy hasn't got top end and let's say he hasn't got 90% of his max sprint speed. I'll get a report if he hasn't got there in 2 days. Okay, hey, we got to do something explosive now, because what we don't want is hit somebody not getting there and then all of a sudden, for a long period of time, and then it jumps way up. So that's another thing with our older athletes we'll do, and it just lets them know that, hey, you need to have some more intent when we're doing these things right now. And I want to second Eric. You made a great statement also, Blaine, with for power. If you can't use the ground or you can't decelerate, it just doesn't. It's interesting to watch. We do a lot of force plate. We use our force plates a lot, and we look at the RSI and we're sometimes the guy just doesn't know how to jump. He doesn't know how to land and transfer that force. It's not a relative. It's not really his relative strength right now. He's just learning the movement, and that happens with a lot of our guys. Who've never really jumped. I mean, they don't jump a lot in baseball, and some guys don't do it a lot. Until they get to a full program that's going to do that.
Yeah, I think sometimes when you think at the core, what shapes our thinking in this field at times, and there is sort of this paradigm of vertical jump as the premier test of athleticism, and we base a lot of our how we train, how we emphasize the squat and the deadlift in certain programs on that vertical jump movement, and I know Jeremy spoke recently on getting it more horizontal on, with pushing the sled. And so we're getting better at addressing strength in a multi-directional way. I think one of the most challenging areas is getting into that transverse plane and rotational. It's an area that, other than baseball itself being rotational, we haven't worked in that plane as much as a strength and conditioning field. What are some ways that we develop the rotational movement in our athletes, whether that be range of motion or rotational power? I feel like this is sort of a budding issue that is very relevant right now with all the tech that's out there related to hitting and pitching. So interested in your perspectives on this.
I'll jump in quick. Just in our program, what we see as a player kind of works throughout their career is, as they kind of fill out and they mature physically, they kind of reach their optimal body weight, they've reached some relative strength thresholds, it does become more important to kind of work outside the sagittal plane. The really reason being is, as they've done so much trap bar deadlifting and squatting and pressing and all these sagittal plane movements, they develop these anterior to posterior concentric orientations. So they start to lose some of their dynamic movement of their rib cage and their ability to get into these transverse movements and sequence like they're supposed to. So I think kind of going back to the question we had before is, ultimately we would do all the sagittal plane strength stuff to fill up these buckets, which helps to their sport outputs, whether it be exit velo, bat speed, pitch velocity, those types of things. But once we've achieved that, we have to make sure they maintain this elastic element and dynamic movement capability of the trunk and the rib cage and those types of things. But oftentimes, I'm sure I was guilty of it earlier in my career. We go to the well too many times because it worked earlier. Is evolving throughout their career and understanding. Once we have this general transfer, we have to get more specific. And if we just keep relying on these sagittal plane movements, particularly for pitching, where we're not reacting to something, there's a little bit more of a larger solution space, is you have to maintain these dynamic movements in the transverse plane. And these sagittal plane movements will be contraindicated when they're heavy to a certain point.
Gets me thinking right there. No, I like that.
I think, yeah, it's the rotational component's very specific to baseball, softball, golf. And when we're teaching it, you have the tool, the cables, the Kaisers, medicine balls, just body weight or manual strength. The key for us, I think a differentiator is teaching bilateral rotation. As a righty or a lefty, you think about the amount of volume you're doing. If I'm a righty rotating to the left, at the professional level, it's hundreds of times a day. And now I think it's leaked that way down to the lower levels. And these muscles connect to the skeleton. And we talk about skeletal alignment. And with rotating just the rigors of the job all day long one way, it's going to start to pull that skeleton out of alignment. So remembering what we call unwinding, doing things to the left or to the right, if I'm used to doing it all day to the left, if that makes sense, just to try to combat it a little bit. And we're never gonna do the equal amount of reps the opposite way, but get the athlete thinking about it. And for some of our older guys, it's getting them out of their comfort zone. We'll do a medicine ball wall throw that mimics their pitching motion, and to have them do it, if they're a righty, having them do it lefty it's very unorthodox to them. But we're starting to work different range of motions for different joints. You're switching their landing leg up. And again, it's just the unwinding approach when you're talking about rotational power, something to think of.
Yeah, I know there's been a shift even towards the latter part of my career in professional baseball. They take so many swings. I think Dr. Coleman said up to 20,000 a year. I think there was a shift in balancing the imbalances and more of anti-lateral flexion and extension and with your chops and lifts and all those patterns where we're trying to resist rotation because they're rotating so much. And so I don't know, not that we don't throw medicine balls or or do any type of rotating or Kaiser pulls or things like that. But I think, that's where some of that mobility component comes into, some of the unwinding that I know we did in Toronto and Frank just alluded to. But even like getting back to the power development, I think, minus the velocity of the bar or, sets and reps and things like that, is like guys want to know how that transfers out into their skill. So I think, that's been a huge thing, even with this like rotational piece, even if you're, hitting or pitching or throwing, is guys really want to understand, they understand the concept, but how is this going to make me better on the mound or better in the box, things like that. And so I think it's just an interesting approach of, we don't always have to swing or throw things, whether that's with a medicine ball or the implement that they use on the field, is just really trying to make the connection of the player within those sequences of how we can help make that movement and better and transfer into their skill out onto the field.
Yeah, the best bang for buck we've had is, we'll do pelvic stability exercises, anti-rotational stuff, and it actually correlates to their kinematic sequence in their swing or delivery. And again, we have elite athletes coming in, right? It's cream of the crop. But yeah, I mean, we do med balls, rotational and everything like that. But best bang for buck that we've seen is, during that phase, hitting more anti-rotational stability stuff, pelvic stability exercises, stuff like that will correlate a little bit more in their actual, hitting or throwing.
We definitely have gotten more targeted on this. And I think when you look at it through a theoretical lens, you could say we've gotten better at implementing the force velocity curve. Well, that doesn't mean anything to our players. So the one thing, and I think back to topics like VBT and these force velocity related topics, we're at the stage where we need to be better translators in our sport for these training specific and tech specific topics. Few different technologies have come up. Anyone want to share sort of their current process with technology in the weight room? And I think that really does apply to this strength development process, because now our communication with athletes is so much different with tech. What's your approach to that? Technology in the weight room, and how's it impacting your programs?
All right, I'll start off. We're pretty basic. This year actually went back to percentage based for a while. We did auto regulate a lot on Nintendo, but it's human nature to go in there sometimes and kind of dictate the speed of the bar, and they're not gonna load it up, right? So actually going back to percentage based and actually making them earn the VBT was a really good thing for us. Guys put in the work. Lifting weights is not easy, right? It actually builds toughness in there too, and a little mentality. So we use a lot of technology here, and kind of went back a little bit on that in the weight room a little bit, and it's come out really well. A lot more intent for guys because they can feel actually weight on their back. They're not I guess you say just making an excuse for, oh, I'm tired of that, a long practice. Well, we got VBT, I can just do 225, and I'll be good. But the percentage base worked out for us, and we use a lot. We have a force plate mount here from New Force. It's cell loaded, so it's all one force plate, and we get a lot of information from that, especially when we get intro bullpens, and we kind of assess from that a little bit too. So.
I think pretty basic. I mean, we'll hit some VBT work using accelerometer-based VBTs. I've had pretty extensive experience in the past using more of the LPT type device, and I think ultimately the value that I see in technology from a performance point of view is kind of that biofeedback, and the majority of our guys are highly competitive, and when they see that Johnny is hitting, a certain velocity versus Timmy, the competitive juices start to flow. And this last year, we started incorporating heavily the flying sprints, and we would progress those appropriately. But we had the clock posted on the wall, so when the athletes ran their flying 10, for example, they were able to see that result. And we used kind of that anaerobic speed reserve type approach from Dr. Peter Wayne's work. And what it ultimately turned into was this massive competition amongst the guys. And watching them, you know, just the banter, you know, it really got the competitive juices flowing. But then as a coach, that's where I had to really step in and make sure that we are following what our plan was for that day, as opposed to letting guys run extra reps, for example, because they got beat by, you know, someone else after them. But I think that anything that provides that biofeedback in real time, I think provides tremendous value for the training facility.
That's a great point.
Yeah, for us, Eric, it's kind of really threefold. Is one, kind of diagnostic and assessment pieces. So like NordBoard, force play, contact grid for RSI and those types of things. And then the training and auto regulation piece. So we use GymAware and 1080. Also kind of some of those previous tools we use for readiness testing throughout the week and things like that. And then lastly, the load monitoring piece, which for us, a big piece has been the GPS with our position guys. That has really been a game changer for us. So I come from a big soccer background as well. So just using that to integrate into building out weekly microcycles and planning on the baseball side, because I think, and maybe you guys get a lot more of it in professional versus college, but breaking down the conventions of sport in terms of pregame activities and practice conventions and those types of things that's helped us get better at the first two. And then particularly the actual performance training part is, I think, really quantifying some of the loads the position guys are getting on the field has helped us be a lot more targeted with some of the auto regulation we do in the weight room.
I feel like this is a topic that we could turn this into an all tech roundtable if we wanted to, but you know, I liked, you know, on the sports science side, we see a lot of integration from different sports. Like you mentioned, soccer. And just one thing I want to ask the group, you know, whether it be at the major league level or at the college level, when players are a little bit more established, there's this conversation in LTAD of we need to promote multi-sport athletes, and that is what it's all about, and that is the path towards becoming a great player in one sport. Well, what happens when you have a player in the big leagues that, and I can think of a few that's like, my dad didn't let me play football. I'd get hurt for baseball, or, you know, I wanted to play basketball, did a little rec, but you know, I didn't really have much because, you know, I was baseball all the time. It sort of ties into the motivation of the player and what they're good at and how much money they're making. But that's a conversation in LTAD that we don't have a lot of. Does it change your process working with players that don't have multi-sport backgrounds versus those that are, you know, your typical, you know, 3-sport athletes and things like that?
I think, well, we try to look at athletes, or I think everybody should. I think, you know, they're individual, they're different. And I guess I like multi-sport athletes. I think they're better adapted. I think there's some more durability there in the athletes. They just know how to maybe move. They know where their body is in space a little bit better and in all types of environments. Yet, I think as an organization, a college, you know, whatever it is, I think you need to look at what are you trying to assess for your program and for the sport that they are playing. It's on topic, but it's kind of, so if I'm going to train the guy, saying if I have a list of needs that we believe as the Seattle Mariners are what you have to perform at your highest level, and be able to do it over and over again, hence the durability standpoint, and take that beating and be able to do it again tomorrow. Your initial or yearly or monthly screens should help you identify where this person is and what you could do with him, whether that be using the technology, whether it be, you know, you want to try to get as objective as possible, but you know what? Some of our movement screens are subjective, and our hitting coaches are looking at things sometimes and it's subjective, and then we're talking with them about stuff. So would I change how we trained somebody who just was a starting pitcher, and that's all he did his whole life, and he's 6'10", and he's a baby giraffe. His movement screen is going to tell us what we can do with him. It's not, I believe, it's not going to be because he didn't play football or basketball, he just pitched. Our movement screens and our evaluation process should steer what we'll do with that athlete.
I like that.
Yeah, I think one thing that's happened to us, guys come in, we'll just talk about pitchers, right? So we teach pitchers speed work here. And if you think about it from neuro stand, it's perplexity, right? So if you can teach a kid how to bound, or even simple like elementary stuff is gallop, skip, all that good stuff, skips, and dominate it, the neuro perplexity is going to go up, and the learning capacity is going to go up. So things they'll learn, they can learn more when they go to do their sport. So we've seen some pitchers here that learn how to bound or do a triple jump or do these athletic movements. And I'm not saying that it's officially correlating to picking up pitches and stuff, but it's helped them become more athletic, to be put in movements to actually learn how to tunnel or, actually feel their body for once. So that's been a big thing for us. And the guys take pride in it, right? So the pitchers come in, they want to learn how to bound. They're never going to run the game ever. Okay. But them learning that, it's going to help their learning capacity as well once they learn those movements. So
I like that.
Yeah, I'd say just one thing. Blaine hit a lot of points right there, but I know we oftentimes like getting some northern pitchers who played multiple sports and didn't have the same long season. Better movers that pick up things better conceptually, which Blaine alluded to, but also less wear and tear usually on those guys. And some of our guys that make biggest jumps when they're in our program are multi-sport guys who become just pitchers. And also a lot of our northern guys that have a short season in high school baseball. They don't have the wear and tear, good movement capabilities, and they can make their ceilings a lot higher for their progression throughout college.
Yeah, and following up, Rick, those are such key points that you made there with the wear and tear. Down in Texas, when I was in Dallas, the number of kids that would have overuse injuries. I worked with 21 different sports at the school I was at. It was all guys high school. 99% of our overuse injuries were from baseball or lacrosse, which are two early specialization sports. And when you look at the amount of volume that they go through up to that 9th grade, 10th grade year through the youth sports, it's an eye-opening experience whenever you realize the amount of work that these kids put in at such a young age. And then whenever you get through that peak height velocity, that's when we noticed just a huge spike in overuse injuries, particularly the pars fractures. And if from my point of view, and now that I'm at the collegiate level working with the athletes that we have, it's imperative for us to ask those questions and to have some screens in place when they do come onto campus to try to identify some of those risk factors of the pars fractures and whatnot. Can we identify those before we start our training process? And if you are recruiting kids, or if there's athletes in your organization that were early specializers, the chances of them having one of those overuse type injuries or history of it's going to be really high. And I think it definitely needs to be taken into consideration whenever designing a training program. I know it's something that we fought all the time. I'm trying to keep these kids active in various sports, trying to create other opportunities for them athletically, not necessarily making them play other sports, but even through the training process, can we throw curveballs at them from something that was a lot different for them, a different stimulus, a different routine, to help balance out some of that repetition that we saw on a regular basis. Frank, you alluded to that earlier with the, a righty, for example, that just has that constant rotation over and over again. So I think that if you're not taking that into consideration whenever you're writing your programs, I think you could potentially open yourself up for some injuries down the road from a training perspective.
I really like how, Cliffy, you said the word durability. That could be truly the foundation of an entire strength and conditioning program as it relates to baseball. Blaine, I like how you brought baseball, athleticism into the mix, and then kind of listening to you, Jeremy, as the multi-sport athlete. That's one path. Well, we have to do a good job in our strength and conditioning programs developmentally to implement athletic movements that maybe players are deficient in, and that's going to be very individualized. We have about 10 minutes left, and I want to transition towards the topic of recovery and hear a little bit more from Ashley as well. Recovery's become this extremely broad concept at various levels. We have older players that need a lot of recovery. We have younger players that are using many of the same recovery implements that the older players are using. This relates to sleep. This relates to nutrition, modalities that we're seeing. Ashley, I'll let you kick off on the nutrition side, but I'd like everyone to speak to sort of the landscape of recovery and what that looks like during the developmental process.
Yeah, going back to the technology piece, it's been great to work with our strength coaches so that we can utilize them to help monitor the recovery piece. And if they're seeing different trends using the science that an athlete's not recovering well, it's a great time for the dietitian to come in and help with different recovery techniques. There used to be that like 15-minute, 30-minute window post-workout that was the most important to get in proper nutrition. And we're actually seeing now that it's more like 24 hours. So what you eat within those 24 hours in baseball, that's, you're playing another game within that window. So what you're eating within those 24 hours is so important to help with recovery. So it's not just 15-30 minutes, try to get the right things in, and if you don't do it, your recovery is a waste and you can eat whatever you want. It's really making sure that you're eating the proper things throughout those 24 hours following the event, the game. Obviously carbs, protein, fluid. It's been great to watch different positions and just like staying in touch with the games. Different positions will burn different calories, so then we can help with monitoring portions. The high school athletes have probably the highest metabolism, so it's really making sure that their portions following games are incredibly high, and then continuing that through the 24 hours. Meal timing's important, so making sure you're eating something every 3 to 4 hours within those 24 hours after. Just to help refuel the body, help the body recover, rehydrate. And then again, you're also trying to fuel for the next game. So there's so many different topics involved with recovery, but I think as strength coaches, it is really important to just get in touch with the dietitian so that they can help target different things with the athletes.
Thank you.
I'll jump in real quick on this. When it comes to supplementation, I mean, there's a lot that's changed over the years, but there's not, a lot of the staples exist, especially in the professional sports, higher trained athletes. A lot of research has gone into creatine and, other supplements. I'll say this, that, just reflectively looking back at, strength conditioning and working with the athletes that I worked with and being a former athlete, I think those things that are important that don't get discussed outside of this, I guess, conversation a little bit is the risks that are associated with supplementation. There certainly is a lot of risk out there with some of the supplements that exist. And I look back thinking of, what supplements guys are taking, and what questions I started coming up with was, you have these guys and gals that maybe not recovering, and you start looking into some of these things. And a big piece of that I don't think really gets looked at is what things are they consuming that could impact that, and do we really know what's in those products? So I mean, there's NSF Certified for Sport obviously mitigates that risk, but there's supplements that I had players that would take non-NSF and other products because they felt like they they wanted to take those products, and you wonder what's in some of these products, because research has shown there's contaminated products throughout the supply chain. And so you start having drugs, you start having certain things in these products, not necessarily at a level that causes a drug test failure, or not even in drug tested athletes. You don't know what's in these, what kind of impact that has on their overall health, what impact that has. So just looking back, how to standardize that, I think it's an important part when you start looking at recovery. What variables can you control, and making sure that you're not digging in sand.
Maybe one more thought on this one, and then we'll close it down.
Yeah, Eric, I have something on the recovery. I think with the younger kids and the parents and coaches, it needs to be respected. I mean, it falls through the cracks, the art of recovery. It sometimes needs to be put an emphasis on it just as much as your skill work, and just as much as the strength training and all the supplement work you do for your skill to keep yourself healthy and on the field, because that's the biggest thing that we know that's going to slow down development is being on the sidelines. And educating families that you can't do 9 days worth of work in 7 days. And that's what's kind of happening. We love the multi-sport athlete. We talked about that. And these kids are playing different sports, but they're also playing the same sport that they specialize in. So they're playing two sports at the same time. They'll have basketball practice, and then they'll go to their hitting instructor. And then they'll go work out. Not always in that order. So, we're digging the hole deep with how much is done each day, and the education is not there on how to bounce back. And they're resilient, they're young, but eventually it catches up to them. Whether they have cryotherapy or the leg boots, or they can get massages, they have the soft tissue tools, or they're paying attention to their nutrition, hydration, and sleep. There's just a more is better attitude at the younger levels right now that needs to be broken and retooled, so to speak. So, just
Really,
making sure that they identify it and respect it. Recovery.
that's great. And I want to just close on this. A lot of people in this panel I have a lot of respect for in these meetings today. And from the NSCA, I get to say bridge the gap a lot. But as coaches, our job is to basically translate the why for athletes. So a topic like this allows us to revisit that why for ourselves and frame it within a developmental process. That is extremely important as coaches, not to lose our why and why we're working with our players, why we're passionate for this profession. There's so many topics. We could never touch all of LTAD within an hour, but truly thankful for everybody's thoughts and opinions today. And thanks for including the NSCA in this, as always. And you just so the society has an ally at the headquarters, and I want to fight for you guys as we move things forward.
Thanks, Eric.
Thanks, Eric. Well, I want to thank Jeremy, Ashley, Chris, James, Blaine, Frank, Rick. We appreciate it, and Eric, the NSCA and the baseball SIG. And I think we're going to continue to do events like this moving forward. I don't know when the next one's going to be, but it's not going to be too long away. So I appreciate everybody's time. And